So I'll use this technique to create part of the head of the pen. And so rather than doing this in its own document, I'm just going to close this window that I used to experiment, and I'll focus on my pen project. So I'm going to jump out and look at this again from the front view. It's really important that whenever you generate a lathe NURBS object or the spline that's going to be inside the lathe NURBS, that you always want to reference the front view. Now, I definitely want to change the display, and I'll change this to at least quick shading with lines, and that gives me a very clear idea of the shape that I'm looking at. Now, I'm just going to use the Freehand spline tool, and by zooming in, I get a really clear idea of how this shape is going to be created relative to my pen. So I'll just actually use this as a reference, and I'll just do a quick click and drag, and that's basically about the shape that I wanted to create. Now, I'll click and hold on the NURBS menu, and I'll generate my lathe, and I'll drag and drop my spline. Now, I can see that once I generate the lathe that it's actually, a little too dramatic. I'll jump back out and just check out my reference here. Pop that open, and it's not such a dramatic shape. Again, I'm focusing on this kind of blue plastic piece. I'll deal with these metal parts a little bit later. So I'll jump back into Cinema 4D, and I'll just modify the spline. The easiest thing to do is check the green check mark in the lathe NURBS, and that temporarily turns it off. I'm going to go into the live select tool, which will allow me to select multiple points very easily. So I'll just click and drag across those. And now that I have the 2 points, I left that third point alone, and that'll allow me to kind of drag those 2 bottom points out. Now, I'll turn back on my lathe so I get a better idea of what I'm doing here, and I'll just kind of drag that out just a bit. So you can see I more or less got the shape that I wanted. Now I'll deselect, and while I'm in this mode, I'll grab that bottom point, and I'll just take advantage of being able to slide that other point over. So that's more or less what I want. I think I want this to be a little bit longer, so I'll drag that down as well. Now I'll exit the point edit mode. I'll select the lathe NURBS. I'll make sure I'm in the model mode of the tool. That makes sure that I'm influencing the entire model. And I'll grab the move tool. Now, one of the strange things that just happens based on the way that I created the shape is the lathe NURBS is actually registered to the 000, the origin of the 3D space. And yet I created the spline way up here. Once I drop the spline inside the lathe NURBS, it adopts its coordinate system. So my axes are a little off of the center of the object, and we can fix that later, but for this presentation, it's a little outside the scope of that. So I'm fairly happy with the way that everything looks. I'll probably go back in and tweak this a little bit more, but I'll just throw the blue cap on the end, and I'll jump into my perspective view, and I'll get a better sense of what this looks like. Now, I'm going to resist the urge to over-design that cap at the end. But it's feeling a little small based on what I'm looking at, but that's okay. Next thing I'll do is I'll just throw a real simple cone into the equation. And I'm just making this very small because I know that I want it to fit inside the end here. And I'll just kind of move it up a little bit, tap the S key and zoom way in. And now I can just kind of tinker with this a bit. So I'll move this up. I definitely want more height here. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing these values. So as I open up the top radius, I can see that I'll probably want to adjust this plastic piece that I created just to kind of slide over the edge here. So I'll want to pull that out just a bit. I'll do that in just a few minutes. I'll take that bottom radius down maybe to about 1.5 based on the scale that I'm modeling to here. So again, I'm just kind of working back and forth here. I'll jump back into the spline. I'll turn the lathe off, select the spline, and in order to modify the spline points, I got to go into point mode. This is just an object like anything else, and if I click, I'm dragging to select both of those points inside the spline. I'll turn the NURBS object back on so I get a better sense of what I'm doing here. And I'm just going to drag those 2 points so that they'll allow for this new metal piece that I'm making to go up inside of it. So I'll go back to the lathe object, always making sure that I'm exiting the point mode if I did in fact turn that on. And I can see that the top of my lathe object is occupying the same space as the pen body here. So I'll just correct for that a little bit by going to the move tool, and I'll move this whole thing down. So here's a situation where I want to move this down, and it's a little tricky because my access point, my registration point for that object is way down here. But I was able just to zoom out a little bit and still eyeball it, and that looks pretty good. So finally, I'll wrap this pen object up by just throwing a simple sphere into the equation for the ballpoint pen. I'll take that sphere and I'll take it way down, maybe to 1 centimeter for now, and I'll move that up. I'll tap the S key to zoom way in, and I'll bump that up to 2. It's a little big. So I'll go back down to 1.5, and that's just about where I want it. That looks pretty good. So I'm fairly happy with the modeling of the pen. Again, I could spend a lot of time kind of refining this and really thinking about how this cap looks relative to this, but now I'm just going to create a real simple, I'll call this pen brass texture. And the pen brass is going to be something that's kind of in this orange brown, kind of a dark brown metallic color. So I'll just do this really quickly, and I'll throw a bit of a reflection on it. So it kind of reads more like a metal, so it'll be kind of this shiny, and that feels a little dark, so I'll go back to the color channel and I'll just lighten that up a little bit, right about, that's right about where I want it. Probably a little too shiny right now, but I'll throw that on the ball point of the pen, and I'll throw that on this cone object, and all of a sudden I have this pen object that starts to feel a lot more like a pen. So I'll save what I'm working on. I'm going to select all of this content and I'll group it together, and I'll call this pen, and I'll throw it back into my desk scene. We'll catch up in the next presentation, and we'll throw some paper into the equation, and we'll arrange this content on the desk. And we'll do that a little bit later.